Hello, everyone. Thanks for staying for the late game here.
We're all that stands between them and the delights of New Orleans.
I know, 20 minutes, 20 minutes away from hurricanes.
Yeah.
Promise. So let's get into this. Nigel, like, when we first met in 2015, fantasy sports and FanDuel was rocking.
Yeah.
You were hitting $1 billion valuation, $100 million in revenue,
Yeah.
just like hockey stick growth.
Yeah.
And then the regulators came about.
Yeah.
What's the last year been like for you?
So definitely a roller coaster, and yes, 2014, phenomenal year, phenomenal growth. Going into 2015, again another year of very very fast growth. And as you're aware, if obviously the headlines last October, we sort of had a crisis in the industry, and that crisis then created this regulatory crisis where sentiment just shifted very dramatically against fantasy sports or daily fantasy sports. And we had sort of rolling attorney generals across the country, really deciding that they didn't think fantasy sports was legal, and particularly daily fantasy sports. And so you can imagine, as a company, and we have all this momentum, and our focus really was very much on growth, and we have this sort of period where every day you'd wake up and you'd be like, oh my God, there goes Illinois, there goes Texas. And we had a period of sort of 2 or 3 months where we had negative opinions on, I think it's something like 8 to 10 states, which is just quite very, very scary period. So that period was definitely very, very challenging for the company.
How many people here do fantasy sports and daily fantasy sports? So we got a good clutch. You said there was a parade of attorney generals looking
Yes.
to sue you. What do you think that was? Do you think, obviously last season you and DraftKings, it seemed you couldn't turn on any TV without an ad with people saying how much money they made.
Yes.
Did the marketing kind of, you think, antagonize the lawmakers?
Absolutely. But I think there's kind of a broader theme here, which is like a lot of disruptive technology businesses, we operated within the law. Like the law is actually, we feel, was very clear. But it wasn't written with us in mind. Like you can't write the law with a particular technology that doesn't exist in mind. And with fantasy sports, it grew up over 50 years. It was small, it was low key. And while we were within the law, the laws didn't sort of envisage multi-billion-dollar businesses operating at the scale we did. And I think what happened was, through last year, in particular with the advertising, we really put it out there. And so suddenly something that has been happening for 50 odd years under the table, where nobody's really that concerned, suddenly became mainstream. And on Sunday Night Football, on Thursday Night Football. And so suddenly people sat back and said, wait a second, this can't be allowed under our current regime as an unregulated business. I think that was the other thing, is there's no rules, there's no regulations. And so that, I think, was what prompted it. Now, the good part of it was it then prompted the discussion is like, well, fantasy sports is a great thing. Like, 50 million people play fantasy sports, right? But now this has become a big business. It really should be regulated, and we've been supportive of that.
So how are you guys going to get back legal with states like New York that say, and Louisiana that blacked you out? Like, how do you work with the regulators, and what changes are we going to see?
Sure, it's a good question. And this one, I think, is, it's obviously very critical to us, and really a core part of my job over the last 6 months, which is working with AGs and working with legislators in up to 30, 40 states, and helping them understand our product and helping them understand, certainly our view of, there's millions of people who play this in the state. This is an entertainment product, but there should be consumer protection in there for those people. One of the things that I find that I think has been fantastic is, I think in tech a lot of times people look at legislators as always being negative. Like, no, we don't want this in our state. We don't want Airbnb, we don't want Uber, we don't want this tech disruption that sort of Silicon Valley forces on it. What we've discovered is legislators are actually very forward-thinking. They actually saw with us that they saw, hey, my brother, I play fantasy sports. I think I am pro-business. I think it's great that people come up with new ideas and new innovations. And so what we've seen is great engagements across. We've seen bills in something like 30 states. Many of those bills we had nothing to do with. Like legislators said, look, we think it's important there's consumer protection and the law is clarified, and we've then gone and worked with them. And 4 of those states now have, well, 2 of them, the bills have passed and they've been signed into law by the governor, and that's in Virginia and Indiana. And in another 2, Tennessee, and then another one, Mississippi, those bills have been passed and they're waiting signature from the governor. But the amazing thing for me is that the speed at which government has actually taken on an issue and said, you know what, we see a path forward that actually regulates this industry and is good for everyone.
You mentioned player protections. What changes are we made to protect
Sure.
a novice player versus someone who has like the algorithms going and is a pro, I guess?
Yeah. So the first thing is, fantasy sports is a game of skill. And so we've always said, the high-skilled players will beat a low-skilled player. And we've sort of put that out there, and we've always wanted to give people the choice. I think what we didn't do a good enough job was sort of maybe protecting the earlier players and saying, if you're a new player, we're going to put you into a rookie league. So that's what we do, is we put you in with other new players. The other thing maybe we didn't do was to sort of like clearly label, hey, this guy's highly skilled. You can play him if you want, but just be aware that this guy's really good. And that's something that we're doing now. In terms of, and so those are just like some of the product changes. In terms of all of this, though, as a company, what we've done is we've said we need to kind of, whereas before it was all breakout growth, very Silicon Valley type company, now we said, no, we now have a much greater responsibility. We have to look at compliance. We have to be forward thinking. It's not just about complying with, say, the rules in Virginia and Indiana. It's looking at what's right for our users and our customers. And so what we did last October is we put in a board, an advisory board, and it's made up of people like Tom Ridge, who's the former head of Homeland Security and former governor of Pennsylvania, people like Tim Brosnan, who used to be EVP for business operations at MLB, people who could advise us and say, look, it's one thing to be compliant with the law, but what should we be doing in order to doing the right thing for our customers, the right thing for our league partners? And so that's something we put in place last October, and that board meets regularly, and we kind of take these issues to them and say, look, what should we do? Like, this is compliant with the law, but we feel we maybe should be doing more. What do you think?
And the money issue's been a big deal, but you were telling me backstage, and I agree a lot of this, is a lot of people play daily fantasy not for money. I mean, yes, there's like the kind of like the cherry on top, but the motivator's not money.
Yeah.
But the marketing has been about like the jackpot falling from the sky.
Yeah.
Now, how do you change the culture and the messaging of daily fantasy?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Fantasy sports, the top 3 reasons why people play fantasy sports and even daily fantasy sports, number 1, funnily enough, is research. They love the research. One of the things that a sports fan is, on a Sunday afternoon, I'm engaged. Like, I've got sports, whether I've got fantasy or not, but on a Tuesday afternoon, I don't. So they love actually spending time researching it. They love the competition. They love competing against their friends, and they love the live scoring experience, that checking their team that they've put together. And so money actually comes down sort of 4th or 5th. It's kind of, the entry fee is kind of important. If you've ever played in a free league, you'll understand why, because nobody cares, and then it just is pointless. And so the money is kind of important there, but it's not the main driver. And I think one of the things we look back on last year, we probably overemphasized it over the other aspect of just the pure joy of playing fantasy sports, competing against your friends, competing against other people, the trash talk, all of that aspect, which is integrally part of fantasy sports that we're really going to bring more to the fore this year.
And what people don't realize a lot of times is you guys are a giant media company. I mean, kind of like how iTunes unbundled the album, you guys kind of unbundled the sports team.
Yes.
So instead of rooting for the Saints, you're rooting for Drew Brees, or the Giants rooting for Eli Manning. And if you go to a sports bar, everyone is looking at their phones, not their TVs.
Yeah.
That's a huge opportunity.
It is, absolutely.
How do you tackle that?
It absolutely is a huge opportunity. So we've got over 6 million registered users. But with fantasy, it's not just the user base that's important, it's the level of engagement. So we know if somebody's an active player on our site, they will, they'll get up in the morning and they will bring the app. The app will be one of the top 5 apps they use every day. And I think if you said to some of our users, if you had to delete everything apart from like 5 apps, I know we would be in there with email and text messaging. So they're really engaged, and they're engaged, for multiple hours per day or even per week. I think we actually asked people how much time they spend consuming sport, and our average consumer spent 24 hours a week consuming sport, a lot of it on the fantasy side. What we then are doing with that is saying, okay, I know this person's engaged, I know they're on our app, I know now actually when they put their lineup in what games they want to watch. And so we think the really exciting thing is, like, how do we then take somebody from that and saying, I know what game you want to watch, to that game. If you follow the NBA this year, who's one of our partners and investors, they're moving more now into single games. So you don't have to buy the season, you can buy a single game. And one of the things we're really excited about is, how do we go from where we are today to actually say, hey, how do we actually, we know what game you want to watch, can we then take them to that game, like through sending them a
So
single
you'd buy
game?
like your lineup instead, like so
You could, yeah, like imagine you could do a red zone on the app, and you could say, hey, now I know want to watch these games, and I want to watch these players, and then you could just flick between the different games. Now that's not there yet, but that's what I see in the future. And the other one that we're really excited about is something that is here today, which is we've just done a deal with the NBA and Anheuser-Busch to develop what we call as the NBA Fantasy Playoffs. So it's a tournament that runs from the middle of this month to the middle of next month. We expect to do about 1.5 million entries into that, and that's a tournament that's brought to you by Bud Light. So they're sponsoring it, and we will run this tournament. I think we'll have a total number of finalists, but we'll basically have a final in Miami next month, which again is a Bud Light branded tournament. And for Bud Light, what they're excited about is they know those 6 million registered users and even millions more people that view these tournaments. They are that demographic, that 18 to 35-year-old young male sports fan that they crave for, and we've got a really engaged way of getting them.
And you talk about the NBA. You were saying before that, when you first started, NFL ran the show.
Yeah.
But now you said the NBA user base has been surging.
NBA has been, over the last 3 years, NBA growth has been phenomenal.
What's been driving that?
I think there's a number of things. Historically, fantasy basketball has never been strong. It's a long season. It starts. You'd have to draft your team in October when you're in the middle of your football league, and you're having to change your lineup every day. Daily changed that in that you could start in November or December. You could dip in and play on a Tuesday night, but not on a Wednesday night. And so that, I think, has been one of the first things. The other thing with basketball is it's a young demographic. It's a very technically engaged demographic. The NBA have done a phenomenal job of embracing technology. And then lastly, from a fantasy perspective, it's the most exciting sport. Like, it's fast, it's action-packed. Like, if you play in a fantasy basketball tournament, like, unless your team is doing terribly, you always think you're winning right up until the end because everybody's scores going up. It's very, very exciting.
And what kind of innovation, you mentioned kind of the media thing. I mean, this whole legal thing has been a giant distraction. I mean, it's hard enough
I wouldn't say it's a distraction. I think it's, we always knew that we would have to become a regulated industry. And we just never knew how that was going to happen. And actually, if I go back a year or 2 years ago, we actually went to legislators and said, hey, we do feel that there's a need. Like, these laws were never written with, this in mind. Why don't we work with you and clarify it? And they were like, who cares? Like, it's fantasy sports. It's not an issue. So what this, the crisis has done is kind of brought it to a fore. But it was an important thing we had to get through.
But I'm saying the crisis itself has been I'm sure it's put kind of the brakes on innovation and growth. So let's say in a year or two, you got this cleared and you have regulatory. What can we expect as fans from the daily fantasy? What kind of innovation? What kind of growth as a user? What do I expect? When you
what you will definitely see is much more, and even throughout this year, much more investment in the product. And with that, some of that actually connects with the regulatory and compliance side. So what you'll see as a consumer is you will see it'll be much more user-friendly. You'll have these rookie leagues. You'll be able to see who are the highly skilled players. We will, the product mix will be more shifted towards some of these players who want to play more casually. There'll be more social. So definitely what we're really seeing with our players today is that, they want to be able to play more easily with their friends. So these are the things, the themes that are happening over this year. Over a longer time frame, what you will see is more innovation in that live sports experience. And so one of the things we point to today is a product we have called Numberfire. Numberfire Live, which is one of their products, is a way to watch the sports experience where it predicts, they use data analytics to predict the winner of the game throughout and are giving you real-time updates.
Like play-by-play changes?
Play-by-play changes. It's phenomenal. It's like when if you watch any sports game with Numberfire Live on, I challenge you not to want to watch all sports with it. When it's a turnover, when it's a fumble, suddenly you see the percentages shift. You're like, wow, is that really what that means? And sometimes you're like looking at it and going, there's no way that they've got like a 70% chance of winning, even though they're 3 points behind if they've got the ball. And it's kind of really interesting, but when you actually dig into the data, they're right. They've really got a great algorithm, and it's just phenomenal. It's like kind of like watching a stock exchange for sports. And that is something that live sports.
Is it a tool people use to make decisions, or is it more of a kind of?
It's also the number 5. The live is not. That's more about the live sports experience. Okay. But they also have another part to it, which is a tool that helps people make decisions on, say, their daily fantasy sports lineup. And so, we can say to people, hey, with number fire, we can give prediction how LeBron's going to do tonight, how Steph Curry's going to do tonight. Is he good value at this salary or not? And so that's another part of number fire.
With all this regulatory stuff, obviously it's you and DraftKings are the two big people in this room.
Yeah.
Have you been working together to, how is that to make sure that, because it's good for the industry, it's good for everybody. Right?
Yeah, and so we've certainly worked with DraftKings. We actually are, both us and DraftKings are part of the Fantasy Sports Trade Association, which is a trade association of about 400 member companies. Everyone from ESPN, Yahoo, CBS, all the way down to like one-man bands. And 5-6 years ago, we were a 5-man band. So like when people say, hey, we're one of the big companies, like, it wasn't that long ago we were one of the really small ones. Yeah. And that organization, I think, has done a really great job at sort of trying to like bring together different vested interests. Like what we might want and what ESPN want and what the one-man band might want are often different. But what they've been out there in forefront saying, supporting regulation, supporting clarification of the law, supporting common sense regulation and compliance. And so we've worked very closely with the FSTA, who've really been out there around the country, like helping with getting regulation in different states.
So what is a goal to make this all legal by this football season?
So, like, what I would say is, the vast majority of states, like the states we operate in, like it already is legal. That's the thing. What it is, and there isn't specific laws, and there isn't consumer protection. I think that what you'll know is that laws take time, and sometimes they don't get through for completely arcane reasons reasons that our bill sponsor annoyed the Senate president on some other bill, and for that reason he's going to kill this bill. Completely unrelated to what anybody's views in fantasy sports is. And so I think on this year, I think we feel really good momentum to get to 4 bills that are or 2 laws and 2 bills that should become laws. I think at this point in the legislative cycle is very, very good. I think we're definitely going to see more of this legislative cycle, but we're certainly not going to see like 30 or 40. I think that's going to take a couple of years.
We have about a minute left. What should the fantasy fans out here be excited about? What kind of surprises do they have in store in the next year or two with technology, with games, with just the whole
Yeah, I just think particularly in the mobile app, that consumer experience is just going to get better and better. The experience of drafting a team, of being able to access all the information about that player on that phone in that moment is just getting better and better. And then once you have the team, the live scoring experience is just going to get phenomenal, where you really, if you think it's bad today that you're not pulling out you're pulling out your iPhone, I think, in the future you're going to be pulling it out for the game, because it's going to be as good as watching the game itself.
Or just wearing VR.
Or you're wearing VR and it's all there. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.